Hello and welcome to the latest in our Open for Discussion series, now in its second year, and serving as a public forum for the experts and the audiences gathered in the University of London's School of Advanced Study, or SAS. I'm Bill Sherman, I'm director of the Warburg Institute, and I'm happy to host this evening's event along with my colleagues Claire Lees, the school's vice dean and director of the Institute of English Studies, and Katrina Cannon, the librarian of the university's Central Library in Senate House here in Bloomsbury. Now, last year, the three of us put together a panel called Unlocking Collections, how we can activate collections in the face of the challenges of the pandemic. This year, we decided to consider the role played by collections in academic institutions in the so-called soft power landscape. Now, this particular topic is very rich and has been around for a while, but there are two reasons why it's especially timely right now. And by right now, I mean today. Today is International Museum Day, and as you can see from the ICOM website, the theme for this year's International Museum Day is the power of museums. The second reason is that the power of museums is indeed a key theme and a key claim in the UK government's so-called integrated review, Global Britain in a Competitive Age, published this time last year. And in both the Prime Minister's foreword and several sections of the report itself, the review places special emphasis on the importance of cultural and academic resources as wellsprings of unique soft power. You can see where the arrow is. Indeed, more than that, according to the report, they make the UK a soft power superpower. You can hear Boris Johnson saying that phrase, and probably better than I can, with Britain ranked third in the soft power stakes in the world. Now, we could spend, I think, a whole evening together parsing the politics of that phrase, even the rhetoric of that phrase. We could also offer some counter voices, such as a survey carried out by the British Council in 2020, where young people in the G20 group of states, 19 member states of those 20 reported that perceptions of the UK had in fact declined sharply over the last 2 years. And then there's the vexed question of the relevance of soft power during a time of actual war, which sadly we find ourselves in once again. But this panel will put this essential and complex term into perspective. And here to help us are three people who have done some of the hardest work I know on soft power, a real dream team of a panel. And I'll just introduce the three speakers very quickly. Ruth we have the Berlin-based founder of Urkultur and director of the German Friends of Yad Vashem. Ruth held a number of senior positions at the British Council, including postings to Israel and Turkey. And as director of the UK India Year of Culture in 2017, Ruth curated the first ever artwork to cover the entire facade of Buckingham Palace. Moreover, Ruth has worked in some of the world's most politically challenging environments, including North Africa during the Arab Spring and South Sudan. Our second participant is Jonathan Mcclory, partner at Sanctuary Council, an advisory firm in London. Before joining Sanctuary, and when I first met him, Jonathan was general manager for Asia at Portland. And before that, and crucially, based at the Institute of Government, where he developed the world's first composite index for measuring the soft power of countries. And that earlier work informed his development of the Soft Power 30, an annual study that has been widely used by foreign ministries across the globe. And finally, from just across Gordon Square, we have Margot Finn, professor of history at UCL. Margot's academic research and teaching range from Victorian popular politics to British colonial and imperial relations. But she's played a very important role as a leader on a number of external bodies. She served as president of the Royal Historical Society from 2016 to 20, and also served as a trustee of the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum, from 2012 to 2018, which was just long enough to have a taste of the current controversies in the museum world about government control over the membership of their boards of trustees, despite there being so-called arm's length bodies. And with that, I'm going to close my PowerPoint and hand over to Katrina Cannon, my colleague, to chair the discussion.
Thanks very much, Bill, and hi, good evening, everybody. So I am briefly just going to describe what we have asked each of our panelists to look at. This is not meant to be a straitjacket, but we have suggested that they speak for 5 minutes, maybe with a focus on the following 3 questions. One is, what is their definition of soft power? The second is, what do they think the impact of government policy on the soft power landscape is, including asking them to identify some trends and to articulate some particular current concerns that they have in this area. And finally, we've asked them to look at the future of soft power for a heritage and memory organization on this International Museums Day, but also looking at universities as we're part of a university. And again, we're going to go in the order of Ruth first, then on to Jonathan, and then on to Margot. So I'm going to pass over now straight away to Ruth and ask her to give us her 5-minute introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrina and Bill and Claire for inviting me. I'm going to try and share my screen now. And I hope that's working. And I'll just put that on like that. Okay, is that okay? Can somebody give me a thumbs up? That you
Yeah,
can
looks
see?
good.
Okay, so I'm going to start with this picture, which is my first illustration of soft power. I come very much from the sort of practitioner end. I spent 20 years working for the British Council, as Bill mentioned, in postings around the world. And as you can see by the both by the title, but by the beautiful rug and the context, this is Ankara, and it is 2008. So a very different period. So I pulled this out of my photo archives because, well, soft power is not so much a subject that I deal with today, but it certainly had a very big impact on the way that I work, because soft power was something that was very, very present in our work in the British Council. And I've included this because 2008 was a very different world. 2008 in Ankara, or in Turkey, you can see in the background EU-Turkey civil society. You can just about make it out. And what you're seeing here is a group of gentlemen who are, and myself in the center, or a bit off center. On my right is the EU ambassador to Turkey. In the center, you might recognize David Miliband, then foreign minister, and on his left, the then EU negotiator for Turkey. What's unique about this picture is that it is the tail end of EU-Turkey discussions about Turkey's joining the EU. And there was a real push at this period to get Turkey and the EU closer together. Quite a few countries, including Germany, where I'm now based, but also France, were less keen on having Turkey join, whereas the UK was very keen at the time. And this was the launch of a project called My City, which we at the British Council developed using European funding to close the gap culturally between Turkey and the EU by inviting here the mayors and governors of 5 Turkish cities to Ankara to sign an agreement that there would be a 3-year program funded by the EU, supported personally by these mayors and governors, to see 5 European artists produce artworks in 5 Turkish cities to advertise or promote these cities into the EU and make Turkey better known. There was a sense on the Turkish side that there was a lack of understanding of contemporary Turkey, of its diversity, and this was the sort of last push to create what was actually called a cultural bridge between Turkey and the EU. I show it because you see here that you have 5 cities, both the mayors and the governors turn up. It's a big signing ceremony where the then British Foreign Secretary says a measure of a country's progress or is the way that it treats artists and cultural practitioners. And this was the message, and applauded with great enthusiasm by the Turkish representatives here. And they all signed on the dotted line. And oops, I'm having trouble here. Yeah. And it led to this project, which was a three-year project with artworks being destined to be produced for these 5 cities: Çanakkale, Istanbul, Konya, Mardin, and Trabzon. And when I initially designed this program, as I said, with very generous funding from the EU and with the partnership of Osman Kavala, a figure that hopefully you all know, we never thought that it would work, that this would actually be pulled off, but it did. And in fact, here you can see the 5 public art projects, each one designed to promote the city to audiences around the world, because some of the biggest names in contemporary art were included in this project. Cinema Amnesia, for instance, by Mark Wallinger, the screen that you can see below by Clemens von Wedemeyer, the German artist, and so on and so forth. So very leading names, a huge act of trust on the part of the Turkish government, the Turkish cities, that they were willing to accommodate these artists to come and do the work, to allow them to do these works in public. And I show this because many things have changed. Obviously, Turkey's in a very different position now. This was a multilateral project that the UK or the British Council was leading on, but of course it was an EU project. And the magic of it was really about the multilateralism and this sense of mutuality that was so important to it, that it wasn't UK artists coming to showcase their work. It wasn't about trying to prove our greatness in any way, but really about helping one another or finding new ways to communicate. So, and then I want to show one more project, which Bill has already referred to, which was Buckingham Palace projection in 2017. And the reason that I want to mention this is because this project as well, which was the launch event for UK-India Year of Culture, it was, the purpose of the Year of Culture, it came on the end of the referendum and the decision to go ahead with the UK leaving the European Union. The UK was desperate at the time to achieve favor with the Indian government. And we were really thinking about how to improve the relationship between the UK and India in this very delicate year, of course. And I was quite convinced at the time that more than anything that we did in India, we had to make a very big gesture in the UK to celebrate India's independence. And where could you do it better than the most symbolic place of all, having 2 young artists, one Indian, one in the UK, working together, 2 young women artists, literally take over Buckingham Palace. And if you're thinking about soft power, this did certainly achieve what it set out to do. Not only was it, of course, spectacular, but also got a letter to the Queen from Modi saying how honored he was that this motif had been used. And I'm going to stop there with the slides, and because oops, how am I going to get out of this? Okay. Because just a few thoughts on soft power, which is, I think you probably guessed, is not a term that I'm especially keen on. To me, so now 5 years having left the British Council and no longer working in a kind of official capacity in that way, for me, it very much is part of that spectrum of power. It's like a, you know, a sort of, I think of a Caran d'Ache set that goes from soft all the way to military power. It very much makes me think about the British Council and UK public bodies trying to prove their value to the government. And one of the concepts, or one of the questions that I was asked again and again towards the end of my 20-year career at the British Council was always, where's the ROI? And this absolute fixatedness on immediate gratification, immediate results, monitoring and evaluation was the culture that that I think belongs to soft power, and which I really had increasing problems with. That I felt that, you know, for me, cultural relations is really about generosity and I'm not so keen on the word mutuality, but certainly about each having the opportunity to facilitate for the other in a way. And this generosity was certainly starting to be missing for me. So I live in Germany. I think the Germans have quite a different view on soft power. I think German politicians, German diplomats would hesitate to use the term, and I think we all know why. But I'm going to stop there. I think future of soft power, I hope that a sort of more differentiated approach to it can be developed in the future, and less a fixation on immediate results. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and lots of nice meaty topics to come back to in the discussion session. So I'm going to pass over to Jonathan now. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Katrina, and thanks indeed for the invite. It's great to be joining you. So I guess I'm going to major, there are kind of three main points I want to make, picking up on your first question, Katrina, about definition of soft power. I mean, if you've dialed into this Zoom event, then you're probably familiar with the broad definition of it. But I guess what I want to kind of fixate on is picking up on what Ruth has just concluded on, the spectrum of power from soft to hard, and also what Bill referenced at the very beginning around why are we talking about soft power when there's a land war going on in Europe? Does it matter? So I mean, I think with soft power, there's a conceptual issue that stems from its original framing. It was defined in a sense as the opposite of hard power, and defining as the opposite of hard power has set up this false debate that I think has sucked up far too much oxygen and energy in academic debates about proving one has greater utility than the other. And really, it's all about context. They're both important. And yeah, one has primacy over the other in a given context, but not in totality. And arguing such is a bit silly, even though I find myself from time to time getting sucked into such arguments. I would say, you know, as Ruth said, it's a spectrum, and so we have to treat it that way. So Ukraine provides a really interesting example of how the two come together, right? So from the start of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, Ukrainian forces and the government had two objectives. So the first was they needed to defend their territory, protect the capital, and make sure that Russian forces didn't decapitate their government so they could carry on the fight. The second was they needed to rally the rest of the world, or at the very least the Western world, to come to their aid, you know, deliver streams of military aid, and also put heavy pressure on the Russians to cease what they're doing. So essentially, the first challenge was very much a hard power challenge. It was only going to work using their military and their ability to defend themselves. But the second challenge was very much a soft power one. Now, they were aided by the fact that what Russia did was, as I said, it was illegal. It was a violation of international law, let alone norms, and that helped. But at the same time, they had to make the case that they were worth helping. And kind of what's interesting about how well they've done that, I mean, it's always a bit ridiculous to use it as an example, but it was last weekend, so Eurovision, right? Ukraine was miles and miles ahead of every other country on the public vote. And while we can debate they had an okay song, fine. I mean, it was a political vote, as so often it is. And I think Ukraine is also, you know, climbed up into the front and center of people's minds. I mean, I think if we certainly, from my research looking at international opinion polling on country reputation, I mean, back 2016, 2017, 2018, Ukraine would have been very mid to lower table. And I say that with all due respect. It wasn't a country that was front of mind for most people. But now, if we think about, in the last couple of months, Ukraine's hard power and its success in defending itself has generated a great deal of soft power. And importantly, we should recognize there's not necessarily a contradiction in that. Often soft power starts with some form of hard power, whether that's economic or indeed military. So Ukraine does create a very interesting example, but it speaks to the importance of both. They needed the hard power to carry on the fight, but they needed soft power to rally the rest of the world to their cause, which they've done incredibly well. The next point I wanted to pick up is more that third question from Katrina around the future of soft power and sort of trends we can think about. I mean, the first thing I want to say is how the pandemic has changed soft power. So in end of 2020 and early 2021, my firm, Sanctuary Council, did a joint research project with the University of Southern California Center on Public Diplomacy. We held a series of global roundtables with practitioners and experts working in public diplomacy, just to try and bottom out how has the pandemic changed both the global balance of soft power, but also how they think about soft power. Has it changed the way that they essentially inform their opinion about other countries? So what are the, we all broadly know the constituent parts of soft power are around culture, political values, and foreign policy. It gets a lot more detailed than that, but that's sort of the overarching pillars, if you like. But we wanted to know, have the component parts of soft power, have they changed, or has their weighting, I suppose, changed? What's most important? And from those discussions, anyway, we found that yes, for most people, the way that they think about countries has changed, how they assess them in terms of favorability, and it's become a lot more about capability and competence. And I suppose if we think about anecdotally where people think about wanting to travel these days, yes, they still want to go where there's a nice cultural offer or maybe sun and sea, but they're probably thinking a bit more about, is it going to be safe there? What's the public health infrastructure like? Will I be able to, safely board a plane back if there's an issue or something? So these sort of issues around competence have become more important. The final point I want to make, and then I'll leave it there, is just around the devolution of soft power. So we're seeing governments at the subnational level, so specifically cities, but also subnational regions, provinces, states, prefectures, whatever they might be, are taking this much more seriously. There's a handful of subnational regions that have been quite active in global engagement for some time. So Quebec, which to declare an interest has been a client of ours previously. I mean, they've been engaging globally with a sort of essentially a foreign ministry for 40 years now. But you see more states, more regions setting up their own offices, sort of whether they're trade offices or mini embassies, if you like, in some capacity. That's happening more and more. And then on the city level as well, mayors are creating new roles that have an international focus. So the city of Los Angeles is a good example. They have a deputy mayor for international affairs, which is a relatively recently created post. Now, I think this devolution of soft power and global engagement down to that regional or municipal level is nothing but good news for cultural and higher education institutions. Because for regions and cities to really get involved in global engagement, they don't have the levers to pull of either military or economic sanctions or anything like that. They really do have to focus on, well, what's our cultural offer? What's our societal offer? What does our higher education ecosystem look like? And it's really those kind of the elements that we automatically associate with soft power. So I think I'll leave it there as my opening 5 minutes, which hopefully I didn't go too far over.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. That was great and fantastic in that it was completely different to Roots, and also lots of resonances for those of us who are based in London institutions. Certainly in the University of London, we're talking a lot about civic engagement and that whole kind of aspect of it. Anyway, I'm going to pass over now to our final panelist for introductory 5 minutes, and that's Margot. Thank you, Margot.
Thanks very much. And I think some of what I say, though hopefully being different than my two predecessors, will also resonate with some of the things that they've said. I haven't myself come up with a definition of soft power, but one of the things that the question prompted me to ponder, and that I think we might want to bring into our conversation, is about the locus of soft power. The panel has been set up to encourage us to focus on cultural and academic institutions. Jonathan and Ruth, I think, very helpfully have pointed out government as an obvious locus. But I suppose in my thinking about the loci of soft power, I was really struck by the ways in which it's also located outside of institutions and organizations. And in particular, thinking about publics, thinking about citizen science, thinking about social media, and the ways in which our post-Habermasian public spheres mess with those neat institutional formulations of soft power. And sometimes it really is mess with. You think of QAnon, for example, and the ways in which the diffusion of soft power is, I think, different in the 21st century in some ways than it has been hitherto. I mean, I'm an imperial historian, a colonial historian, and one of the major forms of soft power, maybe I should put that in quote marks, in the 18th and 19th century that I study is the English language. And I think, while I think that's still true, I think it's less indifferently true than it was at the time. And I think, again, the emergence of citizen science, in which groups of people who aren't necessarily in organizations question which is the best power and which is the best soft power, something we might want to think about. That's obviously majorly enabled by social media. But social media, one just thinks of Elon Musk, can also be quite disabling in these contexts. So that was the first set of responses I had, which unhelpfully didn't give you a definition of soft power, but maybe is about pushing out from the normal loci of soft power that we identify. And that set of ponderings then also made me ask a couple of questions, which I think then very helpfully resonated with Ruth's Ankara image of 2008, because it raised in my mind questions about to what extent is soft power gendered, to what extent is soft power raced, to what extent is soft power aged. You know, one could take all of the 2010 Equality Act categories and ask them about soft power. And Ruth's wonderful image with two women in that image, one is a portrait of a long dead woman, so she's safe. And then there's Ruth, you know, there, who's making it happen, but is the only woman on the soft power stage. And of course, if you'd had a hard power, and I completely support Jonathan's refusal to demarcate, you know, military power or hard power from soft power, but most of the people in 2022 we're still seeing exemplifying hard power are men. You know, they're men in military uniforms, even though there are lots of women in the military and have been for a decade or so. So anyway, thinking gender was the easiest, obvious way of doing that. And what struck me in that context, that wasn't because this was in 2008, the gendering of that particular painting. I mean, I was at a soft power event at Peterhouse College in Cambridge 3 weeks ago, and I was one of two women in the room, and the only other woman in the room was the development manager from that particular college. So that could very easily have been a soft power event with no women in the room. And again, we can add sexuality, we can add you know, all sorts of things to those types of identity politics of soft power, I suppose one could say. So a third point that struck me was the useful relationships between, but also distinctions between soft power organizations when we think of governments, when we think of states, when we think of nations, and when we think of the stories they narrate. And there, particularly relating to the research I've been doing recently, a part of what I've been publishing on is questions of loot. And loot is obviously very much one of these very concrete questions that is now entrammeled in and entailed by soft power debates. And I find it really, really interesting in terms of history of loot in particular, that the most formative soft power organizations really getting to grips with questions of restitution and loot aren't the government museums, but are the individual colleges, the individual archives, the individual libraries that have the power to choose to do what they're going to do and precisely aren't trammeled by the soft power and the hard power of the state or of a particular government that's inhabiting the state at a particular time. So again, I just think that thinking about the distinctions between, but also the relationships between those different levels of state soft power, whatever that is. And I think one could think about slavery and colonization and the narratives we're telling about them similarly, or Holocaust narratives as well. There's a whole tranche of things there that could be usefully thought of. Arm's length institutions, and I have a particular vested interest in museum appointments. Again, I think we can have a really interesting debate about that if we wish, but I think that those discussions can be interestingly located, thinking with loot, for example, between very different types of museums, very different types of cultural organizations, and who governs them. And then finally, I guess, and it does come back to work that Jonathan's done, but that maybe that this adding in citizen science, adding in social media makes us ask this question a little bit differently. What would successful soft power look like? How would we discern that it's happening? How would we measure it? And that gets messier when we move away from these formal organizational units. And maybe that messiness is emancipatory, and maybe it's problematic. So I think I'll stop there. I hope that's not more than my allotted 5 minutes. But I was really interested what everyone said, but wanted to push us in a few interesting other directions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Margot. And thank you to all three of you for sticking to the time. And I'm now going to hand over to Claire, who's going to chair the discussions and questions.
Thank you so much, everybody. That was a fantastic panel, a fantastic immediately opening up to many questions. And while I think about questions, those in the audience, please post, if you wish, your questions in the Q&A, and I'll keep an eye on it while we first open up the panel for questions, observations and insights across the panel. And I'd like to invite Katrina and Bill into that conversation as well, because I think we have a very interesting mix here. It speaks at least to some of the gendered issues that Margot raised, but not all the questions of identity politics. I thought Margot's presentation very nicely mirrored Ruth's, particularly with this absolutely critical issue of the places where power, soft or hard, to pick up Jonathan's point, can be negotiated and leveraged for the benefit of its citizens. So it looks like Bill has his hand up, so I'm going to hand over to Bill in the first place to start the conversation off, and then we'll go to Q&A in the end. We've got about 20 minutes, I think 15 minutes to discuss, and then I'll turn to Q&A.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Those were fantastic presentations and provocations. And I simply want to ask, because we have the benefit of an unusual range of people here, particularly Jonathan, who created this ranking system, this league table. We have Ruth, who's, as we heard, actually had to deliver these immediate results. And I'd love to hear from both of you, as well as Margot, from a slightly different perspective, more of a governance perspective, but also having just survived REF, you're all too aware of all of these issues as they translate to the research excellence framework or assessment exercise. I'm just curious about, how do we measure, and picking up on Margot's point about successful soft power. Jonathan, maybe could you start us off by saying what you thought this ranking system was for, and how your clients have used it, and how governments have used it? And then Ruth, again, from your perspective, just to hear, how it feels to have to present to a government, we did this, we delivered this successful soft power, etc.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Bill, for the great question. So yeah, I mean, it started back when I was still working in the think tank world around 2010, when I sort of had the idea for trying to come up with a way to measure. Really, it's about soft power inputs, or the resources that countries have to draw on. And I think that's because at that stage, certainly I still think at this stage, Ruth will have a view on this. Measuring of inputs is part of the process of the development of the concept, and how we're able to think about it a bit more from this kind of idea. And obviously Joseph Nye, Harvard academic and sometimes senior government official, was the one who gave a name to the concept. I mean, he gives examples. This has been around for millennia, the way that it works, but he just was able to say, look, in the context of international relations, this is what it is. This is soft power. And then having those three pillars of, okay, I think the things that contribute to soft power are political values, culture, and then foreign policy. Essentially, are you a good actor or a bad actor in the world? But what I wanted to try and do is drill down into that a bit more, and really identify what are the things within that ultimately shape a country's global image, and how people see that country, whether or not it's favorable, and whether or not then they're likely to want to go along with that country. I think so input metrics for me, it's the index that I developed the idea was to bring together objective metrics, so things that we can touch and feel, like number of top museums, or number of, say, cultural missions abroad, number of international students, things like that are objectively assessed and measured, and subjective data, which came in the form of international polling. And I guess I did that because I thought using one or the other doesn't give you a complete picture, and you really need both. And I guess the aim was to give decision makers, policymakers, and diplomats at least a rough approximation of what do you have to work with as you're constructing your public diplomacy strategy, insofar as governments construct them. What do you have to work with? And then within that, where are you particularly weak, and what needs to be addressed? Or where are you particularly strong? And where you're strong, then where geographically are those strengths likely to yield some attraction, right? Because it's contextual as well. An overall global snapshot is helpful as a proxy, but it's not super useful to a policymaker. You need to be able to drill down and work out, okay, well, actually this will play really well in Southeast Asia, but it won't play so well in, I don't know, Latin America. So that was essentially the goal, was just to create a decent picture of what countries have to work with, to hopefully inform better policymaking. But where I think a lot more work is needed is around measuring impact, and that becomes really difficult, especially if you're unless you're measuring the impact of a particular campaign around a specific outcome or objective. It can be very, very hard, and especially if you're forced to try and create a return on investment figure, which is I think always of limited utility. The only reason that organizations like British Council or others are asked to do that is so that they can then go to the Treasury or the Finance Ministry and defend their budget, basically.
I think Ruth, you asked Bill, did you ask Ruth to come in there? And then I think Katrina's got a comment as well.
If you like, Ruth, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, this question of measuring impact is really so tricky. I mean, having been around the block a few times in this area, it feels like so many programs are designed specifically to tick certain boxes. And that's not where the magic happens. And I guess what I think is really a shame is that organizations like the British Council, but not exclusively the British Council, are achieving or have achieved over many, many decades so much for the UK. And there's actually very little to prove except to get on with the work. I just, in preparing for this panel discussion, I contacted a couple of my colleagues, including one colleague in Cairo, who I hadn't been in touch with since a couple of years after the Arab Spring. And I asked her how things had panned out, because the British Council had really changed its work during the Arab Spring there. And she said, well, you know, it's just so tragic. We now have to put evaluation forms on seats after events, asking people how this talk or concert has changed their perception of the UK. And so I guess sort of, and I don't think this is just, unique to one organization. I think it's really sort of endemic within the culture, that there is this very short-termist understanding of impact. And really, these things take years. I mean, I meet people all over the world who've benefited from studying a language in one language school or another, whether it's German or French or English or whatever, and it's made such an impact to them, or a scholarship or whatever it is. And and so I think that there's just far too much emphasis on it and not enough trust. And it's really, it's very difficult to create that trust just with numbers or with reports, because really it should be there from the outset.
The school has been running a series of focus groups in the last few weeks on thinking very hard about engagement and how to measure engagement, and with various cultural, civic, higher education organisations across the UK. And this has come up time and time again. And it really does address the question of scale. That is very, this speaks also to Jonathan's point about the reach and the importance of regional work, and also to Margot's point about citizen science. Some of the smaller organisations, I mean, yes, they're doing it to get the money, but they don't have the time to benefit or learn from the skills. I mean, Margot may want to say something about the ref. I've got thoughts about the ref, but Katrina had her hand up. So let's start with Katrina, and then maybe we'll bring Margot in.
Yeah, well, actually, I think this feeds in very well to what you're just saying, Claire. Sorry, I'm right beside the restaurant in the hotel where I'm staying, so people are coming and going a little. I'm just going back to Margot's. You alluded fleetingly, Margot, to the question of government appointments and your willingness to discuss this in greater detail. And I guess I've been kind of reflecting on this. I mean, I've worked in universities as a sector for quite some time. And I've also, I'm also a big fan of cultural and heritage organizations, both as a librarian with a big special collections in both of my institutions recently, but also as a visitor and as a citizen. And I think, for me personally, but I think for many people, the universities and the cultural heritage organizations, and I speak as somebody who's not English, these are a really important part and something that I think we can still be very proud of. But I know that, universities have to lobby and do very intensive lobbying of the government, for example. And going with that kind of lobbying, and I would imagine this is the same for national museums and galleries, is this sense of being useful to the government and helping the government and not contradicting the government too loudly in public. And if we go back to the notion of soft power, as it was defined to me when I first started to get interested in this topic, as trusted organizations that engender trust abroad when the government might be seen to be acting unwisely or irresponsibly, and not saying anybody is doing that at the moment, but where does that leave us if I think there's something around treading that very narrow path to kind of continue to be as wonderful as we are, for which we need independence, but also there's something that universities and cultural heritage organizations have to do to support whatever government is in power. That's kind of where I'd just be interested to hear more from you on that, Margot.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the erosion of the arm's length institutions is a really serious issue. And I think it is bound up in the erosion of the Nolan principles, so that the fundamental principles that are meant to govern behavior in the civil service and in government, have eroded hand in hand with the erosion of major museums, universities, etc., operating at arm's length from government, so funded by government in part, or but not at their behest. And I've definitely seen that in the past 10 years really sharply, both within institutions and across the sector. And I think it's much to be lamented. I think of when I joined the board at the V&A, the chairman was a major Tory donor, and it was a very diverse board. And you could speak out, and you would be heard. I must have been, not only the most left wing, but God knows the least wealthy member of that board. And there was no moment where I felt raise your hand and they know you're going to be a pain and they're going to slap you down. And by the time I left, it was a very different board. And that it was weaker for that. I don't know how else to say that. And the appointments policy on the DCMS appointments policy in museums is now, I've been asked 3 times in the past year and a half and just haven't gone in, because I wouldn't get through now, whereas I did before. But I don't want to be asked, do you support Black Lives Matter? I think that's a completely atrocious question to be asking, particularly when they seem to be asking it in a way that is, do you want to destroy capitalism? Which last time I checked, my pension was rather dependent upon the perpetuation of capitalism. So the questions aren't even really very intelligent questions that clearly people are being asked now. And I think that's a real shame, because having cross-party, really rich boards is terribly important for cultural organizations, and we need much more diverse boards, not less diverse boards, it seems to me. And that's fundamentally different from, say, how the Board of Trustees operates at the Met in New York, where it is simply these filthy rich people who have given lots of money. So I think the UK had something really, really precious there that it is now degrading. It hasn't all gone away. And there are institutions. I'm now a trustee very happily at the Migration Museum, which is not in the DCMS envelope and can take on people like me. So it's not as though the entire landscape is bleak. And I guess that takes me back to this fact that culture and soft power are myriad. And it isn't just the conventional soft power organizations, that we maybe have to be thinking outside of that box, whilst also thinking of Machiavellian strategies for getting a return of the Nolan principles, getting a return of the notion of arm's length, and for fighting for that, because it's really, really important. And that's a cross-party belief. I know lots of conservatives who believe in that and would believe in that in 10 years' time if they were out of power. So I think it's really important to depoliticize some of this and to not allow that debate to become politicized in the way that it is being politicized by some in government, but not all in government.
I think you were, Margot, you were beginning to map out a possible strategy for restoring trust, because there's a trust gap, I think, in many, many different areas, and it's getting wider rather than knitting together cultural arenas.
Yeah, and part of it, I think, is, and I'm just going to use Twitter as a for example. There are some debates that, if you wage them on Twitter, are going to become septic and stupid and violent and destructive. And I think some of what we need to do is do what I'm a legal historian, so do what a legal historian would call forum shopping. That there are actually some debates that are better in some fora than they are in others, and that responsible people, you can still tweet and say, this is a really live, important issue. It's so complicated that to get your head around it, you need to go to this blog, or you need to go to the FT, or, in order to, I can't tweet out an answer to this, but I can tweet you toward some good forums for discussing this. And I think a little bit more of saying 240 characters isn't going to do this, so I'm taking this debate to this other place. So again, that's a very condensed answer to that, but some of it is saying, I don't think this is an appropriate place for doing this. And we do that in all sorts of other things in our lives. And that's not closing down anyone's free speech, but there are some forums that are better than others.
I think that, speaking as a literary scholar, I also think that that telling very, very complex stories you can have fun in a few characters, but complex stories that are told simply and directly, that's a real art. And I think we need to do more of that. I'm aware that I'm encouraging people to post questions if they have any. In the meantime, I think, Bill, you had a hand up a while ago. Do you want to come in at this point?
I was, it's taking us backwards and I don't want to do that, but it was simply reflecting on the fact that it was a little uncanny that we heard in the soft power context, and particularly Jonathan's comment that it's very difficult to measure impact. That, of course, has to resonate for those of us in the universities where impact is now such a big part of the measuring impact is such a big part of the results for the ranking of universities, for the research output. And I just wonder, I love when there are two very different sectors that care about what may be the same thing. And so I kind of wonder, are they the same thing? And is there anything, Jonathan, say, to learn from government or diplomatic measurement of impact, or Ruth from programs, delivery programs, and what we are trying to always show and feel we never can in the university sector around the wider impact of our work? Is there anything? I mean, it's actually been quite a hard-nosed but optimistic conversation. And so I'm kind of looking for the points where I think we can continue to learn and do things that help the situation.
Unfortunately, the short answer would be no.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much to learn from diplomats anyway on this. I mean, when I talk to people, working in this space internationally and ask about what's the latest on how you're measuring various forms of impact, people usually point me back to the British Council and say, well, we really admire what they're doing, and we think, they're farther ahead than we are. Even though, again, I'll defer to Ruth on this, but certainly in my experience, those at the British Council, yes, they're trying, but they still think impact measures are falling short. So no, I don't think there is much to learn from them. But I mean, on the issue of impact and whether it's measurement or not, and to pick up, I think, something Margot said about short-term versus long-term. I mean, the irony is, for most tactics of whether it's public diplomacy or generating soft power, the most effective means are usually the longest term. Yeah. So it is things like scholarships or just attracting international students. And you look at prior research on the impact of perception of a country in which an international student has studied in. Not only do they, come away with a higher appreciation, more favorable view of the country in which they studied, but they then become a kind of, mini ambassador, and there's a demonstrated ripple effect from those international students. Yeah, I'm all for international students. So I was at a conference earlier last month that was organized by actually the British Council and Wilton Park as well. And there was a bit of debate. There were members of the academic community in attendance. And there was some debate about to what extent are we doing this in terms of raising international student numbers? Are we doing this for the right reasons? Or has it become more of a financial imperative for universities? So I recognize that it's more complex, but from my perspective as kind of, a researcher and consultant on all things soft power, in my experience, more international students is a good thing, and you will generate more goodwill and more soft power, but that takes a long time, and governments don't have a long time. They have election cycles, unfortunately.
I absolutely agree with what Jonathan's saying. I just want to go back to the Arab Spring example. And at the time when I was put on that particular assignment, I think the CEO of the British Council was sort of hoping that there would be the chance now that we could prove to the UK government that the British Council reached the parts that no other part of government could reach. And so I was sent off to go and work some magic. And I literally felt sick when I got to my first destination, which was Cairo. And people were, everything I heard was pure hatred for the UK and pure hatred for what was seen as sort of colonial powers. And I think over sort of 2 months, I felt completely paralyzed, stuck between the expectations of government and the British Council senior management and the situation that I was encountering. And interestingly enough, the only way out of it, and I think it was, with hindsight, definitely the right way out of it, was to start a partnership with the University of York and do a big study on the role of culture during conflict. And that won so much respect because it showed that the UK didn't have the answers, that the UK was wanting to learn about this very fast changing landscape in North Africa, and was putting its resources into hearing what people had to say. And that is the unique advantage of working with a university, that you can really bring your best minds together and create these kind of partnerships. So I think there is gigantic opportunity for listening in a sort of informed and intelligent way. And at the time we worked with Sultan Barakat, who since moved on, but was professor of conflict studies, and who had brought together an incredible team of expertise, both from the cultural field, but also political sciences. And I really believe that only a university context like that could bring together those kind of minds. So that's definitely where I see the interplay between soft power, cultural relations, and what universities have to offer in that space.
Thank you. I think that brings us back to that point about generosity, openness, slowness, universities opening their doors, listening to civic society, and building those long-term narratives. We have one question that I think is very interesting, and I think we should, the risk, I mean, Ruth, you brought us to a wonderfully hurrah and let's keep doing the work moment there. The risk of this question is that we're going to step back a little bit. I think it's worth just having a quick snapshot response to this question, which is about the UK's government's new global British strategy, and does it present neo-colonial aspects in a post-Brexit world? I mean, the speaker is Jamie Lee Jones, and thanks to the panel for their comments. And I think that's a very interesting point about how, in a post-Brexit world, the strategies that the government and some governments are using are recolonizing different areas. Does anybody want to speak to that? I see some nods. Bill, do you want to pick that up and just run with that? No, he doesn't want to run with that. Is that something that we should be watching and monitoring? Maybe I could ask Margot to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, my initial response to that, in a way, is if Britain wanted to be global Britain, it would be investing massively in Britain's learning languages other than English. And so, yeah, it looks really neo-colonial when you express it in the way in which it's expressed. And I think that's a real mistake. I think that precisely the sorts of discussions that Ruth has just been entering into, a part of what you have to understand is to be able to participate in someone else's culture, and that, which doesn't necessarily mean you're fluent in their language, but does mean that you don't expect everything to be conducted in your language. So I think that cultural sensitivity and linguistic effort, it seemed to me to be essential to having a non-neo-colonial global British vision. I think the other thing that's absolutely essential to making whatever global Britain is, if it happens, not neo-colonial, is grappling with your colonial histories, you know, and that if you categorically refuse to do that and don't know where Britain was in the 17th, the 18th, the 19th century, and what it was doing, then it's very, very hard to do global Britain in a way that isn't neo-colonial. So those would be my two interventions there.
Thank you so much, Margot. I think that's a great point to conclude our discussion this evening on, in part because I could not agree more that we need languages. Languages is a major tool of cultural soft power, and universities need to play a much larger role in that, and libraries and museums can help us there. I think the conversation about unpacking and understanding our colonial pasts and presents and potentially futures is at least on the table. The language one is much harder, but as important. Bill, you want to come in just at the end? I love the way we get to the hour, and you know, there we are. We start talking. It's classic. It's a classic moment.
No.
Bill, you want to come in?
Well, yeah, just very quickly, because again, I mean, I want to be able to take advantage of the range of experiences that we have on this panel, and I'm really struck when I look at the claim in the report, the integrated report, for the UK being a soft power superpower. Some of it is pretty uncontroversial. You know, BBC is a great system. People like the museums in the UK, although as Margot's pointed out, there are some erosions of certain values and behaviors. But one of the most interesting and problematic parts of it, it goes to the heart of, I think, a lot of what we've been discussing, which is the need for what it calls cultural soft power projection. And it says in that bit about investment from competitors like Russia and China in what I guess a lot of us would be tempted to call propaganda or control of media. Is there a way to project, and I ask all three of you, the positive sides of soft power without it leaning over into propaganda or government control of media? How do we do that? I think for me, that would be really nice to hear. I don't know if this is a good final question, but Jonathan? Yeah.
I'll attempt to answer that. I think it's different for every country. Some get a bit more leeway in terms of promotion and projection. So I think a good example of a country who has taken a very determined and strategic approach to building up their cultural and creative industries and then trying to project it and sell it around the world is South Korea. And you know, even though some, you know, they've invested a lot of sort of government-sponsored cultural projects, but even that's kind of just helped the ecosystem. So some of the, you know, the big stars that aren't related to, say, government sponsored projects have done very well. For the UK, I mean, what government should or can do, I suppose, to be helpful, they need a light touch approach, but they can provide a platform, I suppose, as long as that remains light touch. And so I think a good example of this is quite old now, but I think it was 2014, the Great Campaign organized the Great British Festival of Creativity, which was held in Shanghai, where they brought a number of sort of great British brands and creatives and cultural stars and just gave them a platform. And I don't think, you know, they weren't trying to push any one message particularly hard. It was just, here's what we have to offer in the kind of cultural, creative, and consumer space. And just by being a platform, I think that was useful. But when it's sort of heavy fingerprints and very obvious, it becomes less effective. I think particularly for, well, I think some countries, maybe up and coming, get a little bit more slack. But authoritarian countries know, and also, you know, long established democratic countries, I don't think get that slack either.
Margot, do come in.
Yeah, I think in terms of mechanisms, instead of projection, we should be thinking of co-production. And then you're talking about relationships, which again, you know, costly and take time. But if we can co-produce together, that's where the real power lies. And that in a way, those educational fellowships that Jonathan's been talking about, you know, that is a form of co-production. It's not how we package it typically, but that's what's happening. And each side is giving and getting something out of that relationship. And I think that rather than projecting ourselves onto others is the road to real soft, meaningful power that enables, which is to me is why we should be doing soft power. It should be enabling.
Ruth, do you have a final thought there?
Yeah, just to follow up on exactly that. I mean, I suppose I could give a small plug to my adopted country, to Germany, which seems to have become the sort of darling in the UK, because I'm always reading books or articles saying how the Germans do it better. I do think that Germany has, and Germans have, a very complicated relationship to their kind of national identity, and sort of, you know, are tying themselves up in knots about feeling national pride and things like that. But I think that at the end of the day, it serves Germans very well. And it's exactly that kind of facilitating approach and saying, you know, we're here for you. And often, you know, I hear from UK institutions, you know, I've just managed to get some funding from a German foundation or whatever. You know, funding is given, not too many questions asked, you know, a kind of very kind of much more supportive environment for making and developing ideas, I think goes a long way. And I think that's it's a kind of enviable position to be in. So I'll just end on that.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm envious, and I do know that. And an argument for, you know, a much looser, freer sets of funding, smaller amounts of funding that is building longer term projects, I think it'll be very, very valuable. Soft power as enabling, I think, is a real leitmotif of the whole of this discussion. I want to give the last word to Katrina, because she's prompted me. I mean, there's another form of co-production and projection that is actually going to happen very soon in Senate House. So do you want to just close with this plug that I know you want to make, because it's an interesting form of co-production, soft power, and languages and arts practice.
Yeah, thanks so much, Claire. All the kind of conversations we've been having about co-production have made me think a lot. I've been working with public engagement with research projects for, you know, sort of over 5 years now. And very much when we talk about public engagement with research, it's not supposed to be the academy holding forth to everyone else about what we're doing and how wonderful it is. It's actually, you know, how can the academy talk to the rest of society in a meaningful and equal way? And that certainly is what I'm aiming and aspiring to do in all the forms of engagement that the library and its collections and spaces and expertise get involved in. And that is why I'm very excited. Claire is very kindly giving me a platform to promote an event that is also involving the School of Advanced Study and the director of the Institute for Modern Languages Research, which is an installation that's going to take place in Senate House Library from the 21st of June through to March next year, called 1,000 Words for Weather. So it's about climate change, and it's a sound installation in the library of Senate House. So I can't say any more because it's very complex, but the sound installations will vary and are fed by weather stations from around the world. And we will also have a physical exhibition of related items from our collection. We have a very rich collection around climate and nature from many centuries. And there'll be a physical exhibition within the library, but there will also be digitized versions of those items. And we will be having a wonderful discussion in the library, but that will also be hybrid between the climate scientist from Imperial, Professor Freddie Otto, and Jeanette Winterson about Freddie's book, Angry Weather. So that's a little preview of something that will be on our website very soon. So thank you for that. Yeah, and I should say thank you so much to all our speakers. It's just been so fantastic to kind of complicate this narrative and really learn so much by doing so, unpacking and kind of peeling back the onion layers. But that's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all, Ruth, Jonathan, and Margot, and Bill and Katrina. This has been fantastic. It's one of those frustrating moments where we're all in squares, talking to each other through screens. This is the time where we want the conversation to continue, but we can't. I hope that we can do something similar again. It's clearly on the mind of many organizations at the moment, how to renegotiate the mechanisms of soft power and their relationship with hard power, both nationally, locally, within the UK, but also internationally and globally. It's been a real privilege and an honor to have you all tonight, and thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.